Mom, I wanted to ask you some questions about some of the early family history, okay, going back to the Wagners and the Flanagans, but first really to talk about the Wagners.
Okay.
What,
I may not be perfect on these dates, but I'll try my best to.
yeah, not so much concerned with dates, but
No.
people and,
Right.
and names.
Mhm.
As far as Nana and Grandpa and their families, maybe we can start first with Nana's family
Okay.
and what you remember of their family.
Okay. Well, Nana came from a family of school teachers, and that just progressed over the years. And then her father was a school teacher. That was my grandfather, and it was in their house that I was born. She was there then. And of course, Nana was born in Hungary, which later became Austria. And Grandpa was born in Reichertshofen in Germany.
Do you have any idea how Nana and Grandpa met?
I really don't. I really don't have much of an idea of how they met. But I know that he came to America first, and he was a tailor, which I know a lot of the family doesn't know, but he was a tailor.
Mm-hmm.
And he came here at a time when it was sort of in the Depression time. And
So things were, what was things
before
like
that,
in Europe
he was
at the time?
Well, bad.
Things
That's
were bad
why
in
he
Europe
came
when
over
he came here.
Yeah. And he traveled, though. He was on a ship, and he traveled all over, and then he finally ended up in New York. And then he went back. Now, I don't know, quite remember how, when he came back then to get my mother and I after he had established a tailor shop in New York, in Manhattan.
That was an interesting thing to me a couple of years ago that you told me he was a tailor.
I know, nobody
because
knew it.
I always thought that Grandpa was only a painter.
Yeah.
And I guess he did say that he started painting after the Depression.
Right, because nobody could afford to have tailor-made clothes. And the funny part is that Grandpa Flanigan was also a tailor. Yeah. I mean, I guess in Europe you took a trade, you took up a trade, and so he became a tailor at a very young age. And he was a fantastic tailor. I saw some of the things that he used to make all my clothes, and beautiful tailor work. Really excellent.
As far as Nana, did she ever hold a job in this country when she came, or what was?
No, she never did.
As far as when, if we go back a little bit, when Grandpa first came to this country, you mentioned that you and Nana stayed back home, and where
Right.
did you stay?
In Yennestorf with my grandmother. And my grandmother did not want me to come to this country because she didn't want to let me go. And of course they said they had to take me. And she and my grandfather were very upset, as was Tante Mitzi. So
you mentioned also, as far as Grandpa's parents passed away at a very young age.
Right. His mother was his grandmother was old. His mother, rather, was, wait a minute, his grandmother. She died in a fire, in a barn, I guess.
She had outlived his mom and dad.
Yeah, right.
When his mom and dad passed away, he lived with his grandmother.
Right. And then when she died, then, because he was left on his own as a very young man. And he had 3 older brothers.
So he lived with his brothers then, I guess?
He might have. I don't know.
His brothers' names?
Uncle George was the oldest, and he was the one that was killed in the service.
That was which war?
World War I.
World War I.
Right. And then his next brother was Uncle Lawrence, and he worked in the post office all his life.
They call Lawrence Lentz?
Lentz. They called him Lentz. And then there was Uncle Hans, and he always had some kind of a shop, a little lingerie and a shop like that. And they all looked alike, except George. He was different.
Mm-hmm.
And then he had a wonderful sister, Maria, Tante Maria. And she was just a sweet little lady. And she had 1 child.
Nana, again, you said she had what, a brother or sister?
One brother, Irwin,
And
who she brought to this country many years ago. And then he married here, and they had 2 children, Nancy and Irwin. But then Irwin went back to Europe, and Nancy stayed here, and the mother went back. They both went back to Europe, Irwin and Mitzi. And then he died over there, and she just died recently.
what do you remember of your childhood first coming to this country, as far as, I don't know how back you remember. How far
All I
back you
remember is that when I came over here, I barely remember the Statue of Liberty and
Mhm.
the boat.
But you actually remember that you
Oh
were
yeah,
actually,
oh yeah. I
Uh-huh.
remember being on the boat.
Uh-huh.
And then when I got over here, I remember going into kindergarten and looking completely different than all those kids and couldn't speak a word of English. So that was a little rough. So
Well, of
that
course,
was,
one of Grandpa's famous sayings, it was about the boat.
yeah,
Remember?
right.
He used to say, we came over on the right
Right
boat.
boat, yeah.
Next one would have been too late.
That's
Right.
right. That's exactly what he said. That's right. But I don't really remember too. Now I don't remember too much of being in Austria till I was 5 years old. Now when I went back the first time, I did remember a little, and I could picture a little girl that I used to play with. But I don't know.
So as far as after kindergarten and elementary and schooling that you had here, would you remember where you went to school and
Oh
those
yeah,
schools?
right.
Where
I
did you
went
go?
to PS 196, PS 28. I went to Wadley High and Hunter High, and then I went to the Washington School for Secretaries for 2 years.
And what was, did you move to different apartments, or do you remember a certain apartment that you lived
We
in New York?
lived at 486 West 136th Street, Manhattan, right across the street from the Lewiston Stadium. And before that, I don't know, we lived someplace on 80-some-odd Street. And then we moved to the Bronx, 16 East 177th Street. And then from there to Peekskill.
Okay. As far as when you were here, you of course had your brother.
Right.
You were how
He
old
was-
when he was born?
I was 8 years old when he was born, and he was
And that
born,
is Uncle Jay.
right. Now, I was born in the schoolroom in Yanistorf, and he was born at home with a midwife.
With a midwife.
Yeah, he was a huge baby, and my mother had a hard time. I remember being there.
What do you remember as far as a teenager with your mother and father? How were they as you were growing up? What was your mother like?
She was okay. I mean, we got along fine. I mean, I did a lot of, I was very athletic, so I went at track and high jumping and all that stuff. My father loved that. And I even went to Madison Square Garden and ran on a race one time. Grandpa was right there rooting for me all the way. You can imagine.
Yes.
Yeah.
Did Nana work, or was she just a housewife? Or
She was just what she used to do when times were bad. She used to knit. In fact, on one of these pictures, that's the dress that she knitted. And she'd knit all my clothes.
She made some beautiful tablecloths.
Yeah,
as I
crocheted, she knitted. Well, because her sister and she, when they went to school, they went to private school, and they were brought up to do all those things. Today they don't do that, but I mean, she really did knit, and she knitted dresses for practically nothing for people. I mean, in those days, but she was glad to get the extra money.
Yeah.
And she was she was a terrific cook.
Yes. Dumplings. I remember
Yeah,
the dumplings.
everything. Cookies,
Yeah.
cakes, you
Yeah.
name it, she could cook.
Well, we have Nana's Christmas cookies recipes from the
Right,
Birmingham.
yeah,
So
right.
I certainly remember those cookies in the time
Yeah.
we went to New York.
yeah.
How old were you when you met Dad, and do you remember how you two met?
We met at the Newman Club at NYU. I was down there taking German courses and advertising courses, and I decided I'd go up to the Newman Club. So I did, and to join you had to pay your dues, and so Daddy was the treasurer, so I had to give him the dues, and he gave me a little slip. And so then after that, one day I went in there and he said, would you like to go to a dance? And I thought he was asking me, and he was asking me to go with someone else, and I was furious, and the date was a dud, and I was so mad at him. But then after that, he asked me, to go to some dance or something. There was always some activity there, so that's how we
So
met.
when you were dating, was it a rocky
No,
road?
not the least bit. Not the least bit.
Not the ones that we see these days.
No,
all around.
no problems whatsoever.
And how long did you date before you finally got married?
Well, when he went into the service, we decided that we would get married. No one was happy about it. No, Nana and Grandpa weren't happy because they thought if anything happened, he was in the Air Corps, that I'd be a widow. And Mr. and Mrs. Flanigan, felt the same way.
Okay, so we can go back so he was in New York City.
Mhm.
So this is at school then, and
Yeah.
the Newman Club. club. So,
Right. Then
how
he,
was it that do you know how he wound up at NYU or?
well, because Ted went to NYU.
Oh, so Uncle Ted
So
went
Uncle
to.
Ted went to NYU. So when he came to New York, I think they gave him $100 and said, here you are, and that's how he started school at NYU and lived with Dick Conity and Everett on the Mac.
Which
And,
are still friends.
still in fraternity
Yes.
house.
Okay. Then of course comes World War II.
World War II, he enlists, and
How did that feel for you?
terrible,
Yeah.
because we were at a communion breakfast, and Monsignor Sheehan was the speaker, and we were having breakfast there, and all of a sudden they broke up the breakfast and announced that Pearl Harbor had been bombed, and everybody just fell apart. So when we went home, my mother and father weren't home. That was in the Bronx then. And when they came in, they could see we were both upset. You know, we told them what had happened.
Of course, in those days when the World War II hit, it was a little different from when I was in high school and college and the Vietnam War came. When there was a different attitude for the young men.
Oh, yeah.
At that time.
It was
there was no question.
Completely
no
patriotic,
question,
and you know, everyone was ready to do what they had to do.
So how long was it from the time that Pearl Harbor happened and that he was off?
Well, he left. He had to wait to get an assignment, so he waited and waited, and then finally they called him up, and then he went to cadet school in Montgomery, Alabama, became a cadet. We got married.
How long would that cadet school go on?
Oh, was it about 9 months?
Wow.
And then I went to Arkansas, Florida, and we got married. It was January 2nd, 1943. And he went overseas in August. And 6 months later, he completed 25 missions and came back.
As far as when you were in Arkansas and he left for the war, where did you then
No,
go?
we went from Arkansas,
you just got
we went
married
to
there?
Tennessee,
Okay.
then we went to Redmond, Oregon, then we went to Bend, and then we went back to St. Louis, and then I came home alone, pregnant with Karen, and he went overseas.
Wow. And of course, that's the beginning of your letter writing, I guess.
That's
the
right.
beginning of your letter writing
But
career.
Daddy was a fantastic letter writer. He wrote all the time.
Yeah. And I think I have a bunch of I have a scrapbook of some of the telegrams. I guess a lot of them were telegrams.
That's right. Well, every time he did a mission, he tried to send me a telegram, which was great because then I knew he was okay. If I didn't hear, that would have been...
It must have been some pretty nervous times.
It was, because I kept getting calls every day from all my friends saying that their husbands had been killed, and it was awful. It was a terrible time.
Do you remember when the end of the war came and how you found out about that and how?
Well, he came home long before the end of the war. Yeah, and then he started teaching on B-29s. He was an instructor on B-29s.
Okay, so he flew the B-17, but was teaching on the B-29s.
But came back and taught on B-29s.
So he did that until he got out?
That's right, until he got out. Yeah.
Had he ever thought, you think, of becoming a commercial pilot after doing that?
No, because he thought it would be very bad. He felt he was very lucky to get through 25 missions, and he just didn't feel that it was a good idea to go on with that. He felt that that was enough, and although some of his friends did.
So you said you were pregnant with Karen, and Karen was born where then?
In New York Hospital, and the only ones who came to see me were my friends that were still around, like Mimi and Mary and all those people, and then we sent him a picture of Karen when she was born. I can't remember those V forms or something, a V letter or something. I can't remember what it was. And then when he came home, she was 6 months old.
So it was 6 months before you ever saw her.
Yeah, right.
And as far as Noni, he was then out of the service when Noni was born?
No, he was in.
So Dad saw Karen when she was 6 months old.
Right, and then we took off.
Okay. You were, tell me a little bit about Noni's birth. And
Noni was born in the Army Hospital in El Paso. It was like a 60-mile trip. Fortunately, we were down there, and I was late with her. So the doctor said, I think we'll give you some x-rays. So I said, okay, fine. So they put me in a hospital gown, open in the back, and I had to walk through a room full of GIs who were getting their physicals. And I said, oh my God, and
So
here
this-
I am like this in front and open in the back, and I started getting labor pains. In the meantime, Daddy had gone back to take Morgan's back to the base. No, to the bus, so they could go back to the base. So I said to the attendant, don't bother with the x-ray room. I said, just get me in that delivery room because this baby is due. So he said, are you sure? I said, yes, I'm positive. So they took me in, and by the time Daddy got back, Noni was born, and the doctor said it was the most spontaneous birth he had ever seen. So that was really, and Morgan's couldn't believe it
And
when
of
they
course,
heard.
Noni's been spontaneous ever
That's
since.
right. She hasn't changed
Yeah.
one bit, not one bit.
How did Karen and Noni get along as little children?
Great,
Yeah, they got
great.
along well.
Yeah, they were 14 months.
So, when Dad came home, okay, Karen was 6 months old.
Mm-hmm.
He must have been pretty excited to see her for the
Yeah,
first time.
it took him a long time to get acquainted with her. He was, it was a shock to see a baby that but, and he knew immediately that she was spoiled because Tante and my mother and my father completely spoiled her. And they called her Stinky.
Oh.
And that's when he said, we're not going to call her Stinky. So then they called her Binky. That's how she got her name.
No, I didn't. That's news to me.
Yeah,
That's news to me.
right. And
so if we started to call her Stinky again, do you think that's okay now
no,
after
I
all
don't
these
think
years?
so.
We better keep it
we
at
better
Binky.
keep it at Binky.
Okay.
Yeah.
Noni comes on the scene when Binky was, what, how old? Binky was
14 months old.
14 months old.
Mhm.
And where did you have Noni?
In the hospital, Army hospital in El Paso. And
That was quite a scene.
that was quite a scene because we were 60 miles from the hospital, so I was late, so we had to go down for a checkup. And Morgan's came with us, and Daddy, and then the Morgans dropped me off, and they were going to go back to the bus. And as I said, I was quite big, and they put me in a gown. And I was like this and open in the back, and I had to walk through this big hall where all these GIs were taking
So you
their
did your part
physicals.
for the war effort,
Right.
for their morale,
Right, I
a
did.
little morale booster.
And I got so shook up that I was doing this. I wasn't in a wheelchair, I was walking, that I started getting labor pains. And I said to the attendant, I said, get me a wheelchair and get me to that delivery room. He said, are you sure? I said, yes, I am. So got in there, and Daddy was taking them to the bus, so he wasn't there. And in no time, Noni was there, and the doctor said the most spontaneous birth he had ever witnessed. It was an Army doctor. And so then by the time Daddy came back, she was there.
And as far as the names, Noni actually was not Noni.
No.
She was nicknamed
Well, Noni
but
was
Noni
nicknamed.
was
Noni
named
was
after
Noni because Karen could not say Joan.
Joan. But
So
as far
she
as
said no.
Karen is named after who then?
Karen was just
Karen.
Karen, and Irene was after my mother.
Okay. And, as
And
far as
Noni
name-
was supposed to be Joseph Andrew, and after
You're
my
expecting a
father,
boy.
after the two grandfathers,
Expecting
expecting a boy, and turned out to be a little girl. So we said, well, what are we going to do now? We had no girl's name, so it became Joan Andrea. And so that was the way her name came about.
Noni came out so fast, I guess she forgot her hair. She went the first
Yeah,
few
she
years.
had very
few
little
years
hair.
with
She
no
was
hair,
about
right?
5 years old when she finally got some hair. I used to put a hat on her to make sure that people thought she was a girl. I mean, I always had a bonnet of some kind on her head.
And you were saying that Noni and Binky were a little spoiled by the...
Yes.
Was Noni too?
Yes, Noni too, sure. Well, that was...
Do you think that the redheads get a little more spoiled than the others? Or
No,
they were equally.
They were equally,
Okay. And then you were still, Dad was still in the service when you had Noni, but then
Right.
he got out of the service?
Got out of the service, and we came back to the Bronx, and in my mother's apartment, because we couldn't find an apartment in those days. It was very hard to find. My mother and Dad moved to a very lovely house in Great Neck, Long Island.
Great Neck, Long Island.
And we were glad to get the apartment, but that was a little rough because it was a walk-up, and with all the children, it was very hard.
And I guess it got harder to walk up when you were pregnant with Joe.
Yeah, right. And with John and Raymond,
That's right.
with you.
Joe was then the first one born in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and he was born where?
At Fordham Hospital.
What did Karen and Noni think of having a little brother?
Well, it's what I thought about
Yeah.
having a son and what your father thought about having a son. I mean,
Yeah.
that was New Year's Eve. We were
Uh-huh.
having a party at our house New Year's Eve, and all of a sudden I said, well, I'm sorry, but I have to leave the party. And Mimi and Mary took over and took care of the party, and I went to the hospital. In those days, the fathers couldn't stay there, so they sent him home. And in fact, Daddy was never at any of the births of any of you children.
Wow.
And so then,
Now, was Joe a big baby, or?
yeah, he was a good-sized baby. But I was so excited that I didn't sleep for 2 days. I was so excited when he was born. And Daddy was very excited, and so was Mr. Flanigan.
And of
to
course,
have-
then he is named Joseph Andrew.
Right. And he's he's really, I mean, you children are the only Flanagans.
That's right.
You know, there are no other Flanagans.
That's right. So then you took a little break.
I took
for
a little
couple,
bit of a
couple
break.
of years.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And then, of course, we come to John.
We come to John.
And
And his middle name is after Gregory,
Greg.
after Daddy and Greg Pacone,
Greg Cole.
whom we had met there in the Bronx, and you know the story of how I met them.
No, I don't.
You know?
No,
Oh,
really.
well, I was pregnant with Joe, and it was hot, and I was walking along the street, and I had seen Joe and Greg in church with their 2 little girls, and I knew I was going to faint, so I pushed the baby. I had Karen and Noni, and no, wait a minute, it was with John maybe. No, it was Joe. I had one of them in the carriage or something, I don't know, and I pushed the carriage against the wall, and I fainted. And Joe Pacone came and picked me up and brought me into her house, and we've been friends ever since. Yeah.
And of course, John is born in 1950.
Right.
Okay, and also in the same hospital as Joe.
Same hospital, by Dr. McTague.
Uh-huh. And what kind of birth was it with John? What was
Well,
that
he wasn't much of a problem. They were all pretty good. It was only when we came to you. that-
He didn't start his problems until he was probably about 2, I would guess.
Yeah, well, maybe a little
A little-
before.
a little
Maybe
bit
a little
before
before
that.
that. And Joe was pretty,
Yeah.
yeah.
Of course, I remember John as, John was the wild one when I was a little tyke, but with John and Joe, the stories, there's some legendary stories about John
Yeah.
as a child.
And Joe, too.
And Joe, too.
I mean, he wandered away and was almost hit by a car in the Bronx there, and
Well,
we used to call him Hole in the Head.
He did get hit by
He
a
did
car.
get hit by a car, right.
Yeah.
But thank God he wasn't hurt badly or anything. But they used to call, Dr. McTague used to call him Hole in the Head.
And then I guess I'm less than a year from John. 50
less
weeks.
than a year,
50 weeks. Irish
right.
twins.
Right. And
Same hospital.
same hospital.
For some reason I thought I'm Bronx Hospital. But it was
You
Ford-
were Bronx.
Oh,
Bronx.
You said Fordham
I
Hospital.
said that's a
Okay.
mistake.
So we're actually all
Bronx,
Bronx
right.
Hospital, not Fordham Hospital.
And you were named Raymond, and Jay was after my brother.
But as far as I remember, that Raymond that was an interesting story about being named Raymond.
Right, because now who was it?
I think
Must
it
have
was
been
Karen.
Karen had a boyfriend in kindergarten that was or something like that was named Raymond, and she wanted you named Raymond, and I said, well, okay, but we have to name him after my brother.
Okay, so I'm
Raymond Jay.
the last one born in New York. So
Right.
what happens in that we make this move, and what was
Well,
going
because
on?
we realized that the apartment
overgrown
was
the
a small
And
apartment,
where was Dad working at the time?
and he was working in New York at the time, but then he got a job with General Foods.
So he started with General Foods.
So that's why we looked to Peekskill, because it was with easy commuting to White Plains.
So did you look at other towns aside from Peekskill?
We
or
did.
Why Peekskill?
Why Peekskill? Because so many General Foods people were there, the Talbots, the Cogswells, so many people that Daddy knew, and he knew he could commute with them.
So he
that's why we
carpooled
came
in.
there.
Yeah. Okay. So you remember moving to the house there in Peekskill?
Yes, I certainly
was
do.
that like?
That was hectic, because it was winter time and there was mud, and I think we went in there 2 days when John had a cement block fall on his foot, and we had to go to the doctor, and that's how we got Dr. Lasardi.
And as far as and was that I was born October 13th, 51. Did we
Yeah.
move to Peekskill that winter?
The next year,
So was I?
February, that following
Okay,
February.
so I was just months old, basically, less than
right.
6 months old.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. And we're in Peekskill, and then we have the 6th of the children.
Right, Kathleen.
Kathleen is 2 years
She's
behind.
born in Cold Spring.
with
by
Dr.
Dr.
Lasardi.
Lasardi, who was our doctor, and who remained our doctor until we left there. And sadly, he died just recently.
So Dad stayed at General Foods how many years? Do you remember how many years
I don't
approximately?
remember how many years, and they went to Continental Baking. And
but I was 10 when we moved from Peekskill, so I guess at least 10. But was he at all General Foods
he was
before
with
that?
Continental Baking when we moved to New Shrewsbury.
No, Sealand Service.
Oh, Sealand Service.
So he
right.
was at
That's
least
right.
10 years really with that's when we
Right,
switched
all that
jobs.
time. Yeah.
Tough to move out of Peekskill, right?
Yes, everybody was.
I still remember myself that as a kid. I mean, as we look back on Peekskill, maybe it wasn't the greatest, but we all had a real hard time moving out of Peekskill.
Well, especially since you were the Freckled King.
Yeah,
I mean,
I was
you
Freckled
didn't
King
want to
of
give up
Peekskill.
that.
But there were other worlds to conquer. Once we got into New Jersey, things seemed to work out. And,
Yeah,
we had a
we
nice,
all loved the house in New
huge yard
Jersey.
and
Beautiful house, and everybody loved it. I loved it there too.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it was a big commute for Daddy from there.
Yeah.
Because then he
Well,
changed
of
jobs.
course, he lost the job at Sealand,
right.
and then we wind up.
Then he went to Continental Baking.
Continental Baking in Rye, New York. So
Right.
after, and we have Karen and Noni both in college at Lemoyne.
Yeah.
Joe has got one more year to high school, and Dad is commuting from Red Bank all the way to Rye, New York. So we make a move to Connecticut.
Not Red Bank. Yes, right.
Well, Shrewsbury.
Right, yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
and then we wind up in Westport.
Right.
Okay. So Joe just had his senior year there in Westport, and then life in Westport starts.
Yes.
What was that like for you coming to Westport after
Marvelous.
New Jersey?
Just wonderful. Although I hated to leave that house in Jersey. I really loved the house and I loved the area. But that's why we chose Westport, because it had a beach and it had a lot of things and a good school system, which was so important to us then.
So it's really in Westport that the first marriages of your children happened, right?
That's right.
And the first college graduations, and then subsequent marriages. And Karen, of course, is the first. And how was that news when you heard the news that Karen had decided to get married?
Well, Noni first.
Noni was engaged before Karen?
Well, because the war broke out, and Richie got in the service.
She didn't get married before you.
Yeah, she did. Yeah, she did. She got married in March. Karen got married in August.
Oh my gosh. I didn't remember that. Huh. So Noni actually got married
Noni
before
got married
Karen?
before Karen. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's right. I hope that's
we better
right.
check. We better check that
that's right.
family
Well,
tape, because
anyway,
I don't
whatever.
seem to think so. I seem to think that Karen was married first, and then that following springtime, because Noni would have still been in college, right? Karen graduated college. They planned that marriage in August. Noni must have just graduated,
And then maybe she got married that March.
so we'll strike that from the tape
All
for
right.
sure.
Well, that's
Anyway, what was it like for you to have your first child married? It was
wonderful.
exciting,
I
right?
was very
Very
excited. Very excited. Excited about, Noni and Richie too.
Yeah.
And wonderful weddings.
And then, of course, first grandchildren. What
well,
was that for you?
the first grandchild was Brian, and we were there, right there, so that was exciting, because we were right there.
That's right, Brian was born
He was born in Norwalk Hospital, and when he was born, I was so excited, and I worked at famous schools, and I told the whole school about Brian's birth, and finally my boss called me in, and he said, Irma, he said, would you do me a favor? I said, what? He said, would you leave, he said, and go down and see that grandchild, and then don't come back for the rest of the day. I said, fine, thank you, I'll do it. And I left, and I went down to see Brian.
So, and then Kristen comes after Brian.
Yeah, but she was born in Panama.
She was born in Panama.
So we didn't see her till she was 6 months old, but they kept sending pictures. They were very good. And then when she came back, we all went to the airport to meet them, and we just smothered her.
Well, all told now, we have in the family the grandchildren. How many grandchildren in the Flanigan side? Flanigan's, Westlars, Esterikas.
Well,
Brian and Mark.
Brian and Mark.
Got Kristen, Amy, Lori, and
Lori
RJ.
and RJ.
And then, of course, we backtrack a little bit to John Flanigan. He was actually, John was married before Joe, right?
Yeah.
John was married, then Joe.
Right.
John got married during his college years.
Right.
And
Graduated with Michael walking down practically on his side.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll take a little break.
I think we skipped.
Kathleen over there.
No, we haven't. We didn't cover it really.
I think, Mom, some of the great memories that I have as a kid is loading up in the station wagon and going on different vacations with 6 kids, all assorted sizes. It was quite a project.
That was a project.
A few of them stand out in my mind. I don't know which ones really were first, but I do remember the Washington, D.C. vacation, Niagara Falls, and
Lake Champlain.
Lake Champlain, St. Lawrence River.
St. Lawrence River, yeah.
So there were some big
one.
ones. I still can remember Washington, D.C. and the Washington Monument. Now, we must have been visiting
Pecones
down
yeah,
there.
Right.
But it must have been quite a job getting the crew together.
It certainly was. It was a big job. But I have to say, generally, I think you children were very well behaved. I mean, you know.
Not easy to have 8 people in one car.
That's right. And not only that, I mean, the thing that proves that you were well behaved is we were all always invited as a family to visit other people.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, if it hadn't been that way, I don't think we would have had that many invitations.
The Lake Champlain vacation, of course, we had our boat at the time.
Yes,
do you remember the story about the boat and how we got that boat?
No, I don't.
I seem to think that it was some kind of a card game or something. Did Dad win that thing?
No,
that was the legend.
No, I
no.
don't think that's right.
Okay.
I don't really know.
We do remember the boat as a boat.
I was against it.
Yeah.
I was not for that boat at all.
Well, boats and dogs and things
But
sometimes.
I was vetoed on that one.
The boat was an old wood boat, a 16-foot boat with a small engine on it. It leaked more than anything
And
I
remember
ever
when we lost the boat or the trailer or something in Westport?
Yeah.
And, that was not my favorite.
That boat was something. We did, you know, for a little boat, we had lots of fun with it. And of course, it did provide us with something to get out on the water and on those vacations.
Water ski.
Yeah, water skiing.
All good water skiers.
Of course, Noni and Joe were great water skiers early on. John was skiing as a young kid.
Yeah.
Dad used to try to get out of the water and have a heck of a time.
Yeah, but he did.
But he did.
He made it. I never made it.
Yeah. Did you try?
Yeah. Never made it.
I remember that Karen was unbelievable.
Never made it.
Yeah. Karen, I don't think ever made it either.
I even tried at Cypress Gardens and never made it.
I never knew you'd attempted.
Well, they had these 2 gorgeous-looking guys trying to keep me up, and they kept trying and trying. I finally said, forget it, you know.
The Lake Champlain, that was quite a spot there, wasn't it?
Quite a spot.
Can you remember a little bit about that place?
All I know is it didn't look like the brochure.
Yeah.
When we got up there. But everybody had a good time.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think that was, you know, it was fine. It was the last vacation before Karen went to college.
Yeah.
That was the point of it.
And of course, the St. Lawrence vacation, we got to spend time with the Flanigan
Charlie,
side up there.
Right. And Brenda and the whole family, the whole Flanigan family. That was fun.
How about some of the times we spent in Watertown? Of course, I was
we went up there
I was a little
often.
kid and really didn't remember Uncle Alex's camp and some of those things, but I do have some pictures of the camp.
Yeah.
What was that like up there?
That was pretty rugged.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was pretty rugged. And we were never too anxious to go, but we liked, you know, Alex and Eileen, so we would go. But, I mean, he was wonderful about it. We had good food and everything, but there was nothing to do there.
Yeah.
You know, it was absolutely nothing to do.
So,
but
would
we
you
went
tell
up there
stories and
many times.
things? Or?
Oh, yeah. And we, you know, I forget.
Cards or?
Played cards.
Yeah,
cards. Lots of cards. So it was fun. And, you know, they always look forward to our visits.
Okay. We can stop for a sec. As far as you remember of Dad's side of the family, Mom, brothers and sisters, if we could, well, we'll start with his parents first.
Yeah, well, when I first went to Watertown, just to show you how times have changed, I had to get a letter from Aunt Marion saying that I was going to stay at her house because my mother and father wanted to make sure that that's where I was going. Now today that would never happen, but I got a letter, I sent it to Aunt Marion, sent a letter saying that I was going to stay with her. So when I went up there, it was winter time. and that was my first, you know, time being in a cold area like that, and I can remember the milk in the, you know, bottle going up and ice, and it was only for a short visit, but that was my first visit to meet all the Flanagans. And the next day was Sunday, and we had to go to church, and I can remember, and it was no heat upstairs, no heat in the bedrooms, and I was freezing, like, you know, still freezing. But anyway, so Mr. Flanagan called up and he said, "Is that girl ever gonna get up out of bed?" And I jumped out of bed, got dressed, came downstairs, and he scared me, you know, I mean, but I was freezing, I was shivering. And but they were great. And
Now, was he just kidding around, or was he being semi-serious?
I was semi-serious,
Yeah.
I think. And so, and I liked Marion and the whole family immediately. There was no problem. I mean, you know, and I assumed they liked me just as well.
Yeah.
But I mean, I liked them.
As far as Mr. Flanagan on that side, he again was a tailor, right?
Right.
So did he have a shop then in Watertown?
He had a shop in Watertown.
He owned his own shop, or
He
worked
owned
with
his
someone?
own shop, and I think he had one woman working for him at that time. And he was a tailor all his life there, you know. He was well known in Watertown. In fact, Daddy, and when he came to NYU, was the only one who had a handmade tuxedo. I mean, you know, which nobody had in those days. It was a beautiful tuxedo. And I think Eileen did some work for him too. But he had his own shop in the arcade, and everybody knew him in town. Andy, they called him.
Mm-hmm. And if we go down from the oldest to the youngest in the Flanagan and Dad's brothers and sisters, so we start with
Uncle Ted.
Uncle Ted.
Uncle Ted, who was came to New York again with, you
Ted
know,
was the oldest.
yeah, on his own, and became very successful, an accountant.
Mm-hmm.
And well, we all know, you know, Tilly was his wife,
Yep.
and they had 3 daughters. And,
after Ted was?
After Ted was Art, and Art lived in Jersey with Marg, and they had 1 daughter. And we were very close with them in those days,
Yes.
you know. And then Charlie. Now Charlie, you know.
Where did Aunt Eileen fit
Oh,
in?
wait a minute. Aunt Eileen's the oldest.
That's what I thought.
Aunt Eileen is
Okay.
the oldest.
So it's
right.
Aunt Eileen, Ted,
Ted,
Uncle Art.
Uncle Art, and right.
We better do a cut there.
And
We don't
Uncle
want to
Charlie.
hold up.
Yeah.
We'll start that one over, Lloyd. A little bit in there, just so we get those ages right. Ready? Yeah. So as far as Dad's brothers and sisters, first
Aunt Eileen.
Aunt Eileen was the oldest.
Right. And she was married to Alex, and they had 3 children. And then there was Uncle Ted,
Uncle Ted.
and he had 3 girls,
Yep. Married to Tilly.
Tilly.
And of
then,
course they had not only the 3 girls, but Gruber. We certainly all remember Gruber.
Right, right.
Um,
So everyone was very happy when we had boys,
Yeah.
because there were no Flanagan boys.
that's right.
So it was, you know, everyone was very thrilled.
Okay, so after Uncle Ted comes
Uncle Art.
Okay.
And Uncle Art was in the Seabees during the war. He came back and had a few problems.
Yeah. Well, that was an interesting thing. We do have the pictures of the reunion there
Yeah,
up in Watertown.
right.
Uncle Charlie was also in the service, but not in our service. He was
In the
with
British,
the British,
yeah.
with the British during
Yeah.
World War II. So Uncle Art was with the
I'm
Seabees.
sure Eileen would know what regiment and
Yeah,
everything,
yeah.
but I don't know.
Dad was in the Air Force, and
Yeah.
Charlie was fighting
Right.
with the British.
And Mrs. Flanagan aged a lot when those
During
3 boys were in the service. She
Well, it
was
must have
very.
been a pretty nervous time.
It was.
3 sons.
And then Daddy, you know, the big thing was his flying over Watertown.
Yeah.
And the whole town out there,
Yeah.
you know, waving and everything, and which he was not supposed to do, but he
Yeah.
flew so low that everybody was afraid he was going to take the telephone wires down. But that made the headlines in the
Yeah.
Watertown
Yeah,
Times.
I have that newspaper here.
Yeah.
That was quite a scene. So after Art comes
Uncle Charlie.
Uncle Charlie, and Uncle Charlie
Now,
was
wait a
an
minute, I
interesting.
don't know, maybe vice versa, but Uncle Charlie was a real interesting story because his Uncle Frank, the Collingwood, Frank Snaith, needed someone to come over to India to take over that business, and the others were too old, and Ted was already in New York, and Art didn't have quite the personality, so Charlie was picked. Daddy was too young,
Mhm.
so Charlie was chosen, and he spent all his life in India. but came back and died in
Well, he
Watertown.
was, of course, one of our favorites as
Oh,
kids
he
because
was
he was a bachelor and a lot of
and he
fun.
was a
tremendous amount of
fascinating
fun.
man to talk to.
I can still remember Uncle Charlie in the mornings. It was pretty funny. He had John and I think, smelling his socks. He would say that he had servants there in India and said that, when he's at home, his servants smell his socks for him in the morning to make sure they're fresh. So he'd ask us to smell these, and of course we would smell them because we figured he's our Uncle Charlie, and
Yeah.
we have to do
Well, he
what
was
he
a
says.
great guy.
But
Anyone that met him
he used to
loved
like to
him.
pull our legs, and of course he was also a great joke teller.
Yeah.
I guess there were some pretty good joke tellers. Was Mr. Flanigan?
No.
Grandpa, was he?
No, he
wasn't
was
really
not like
a
that.
funny guy.
No, he wasn't.
But, Dad, of course,
If
told
you
a
remember
great
Mr.
joke.
Flanagan, he walked as straight as a,
Well, of course, I don't really remember. I remember him a little bit.
and he was always bald. I mean, I
Yeah.
met him. They were old. They were
Yeah.
old to me.
Yeah.
Because my mother and father were so much younger.
Grandma on the Flanagan side passed away, I believe, in 1952 when I was a year old, and I believe that Dad's father maybe was 5 or 6.
Yeah,
I think
right,
that's all.
yeah.
I do remember him coming to Peekskill.
Yes, he
come
did.
down to Peekskill.
He did.
He also, I have some clips that Aunt Eileen said Aunt Marion was going back to Europe, and I guess he joined and went back home the first time in some 30 years.
Oh, yeah,
went
long,
back to
yeah,
England.
yeah.
So that must have been quite a trip.
Oh, yeah, they had quite, and Eileen, I think, went too. Eileen, Marion.
The one that
wait a
I had,
minute,
the one that I
maybe-
had said Aunt Marion.
Yeah.
Marion was returning home, and then I think that he decided late that he was going to go and went with her. So that
Yeah.
must have been a fun trip.
Right.
We certainly had lots of fun in Watertown. I think that I remember lots of Easter times we were up there. And,
Easter time
hunting
when it
for
snowed.
Easter eggs in
And
Aunt
we'd have
Marion's
to
house.
borrow the winter equipment for all the kids because they came with Easter shoes and hats, and we never used them.
Okay, that's a cut. I think we're doing pretty good here. Of course, Mom, after Dad passed away, remember that you met Doug. Never been too clear on how you guys met, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you and Doug met.
Well, it's quite a story,
Yeah.
a very unusual story
Uh-huh.
because he was a bachelor longer than I was, and so I was very lonesome, very lonesome, and I was getting very depressed, so I decided that I would go to this organization called Together. And Grandpa came with me, and that was pretty funny because he came up with me, and I went in, and this woman was interviewing me and asking me all these questions, and Grandpa kept coming in, And I said, Daddy, please just stay outside for a little bit, and we'll be finished. So then I guess Doug had done the same thing, and not at the same time, of course. So then they give you a name of a person, and that's how Doug called me and said, this is Doug Allen, and he said, I have your name from Together, and he said, I'd like to see you sometime, but I'm going to Florida with my sister. And I thought, oh, sure, sister. But he really did go with his sister. And then we started dating, and that's where we are on our 12th anniversary.
Okay. Well, it's been a pleasure, Mom, and I'm sure we could talk for hours
We
about
could.
more and more stuff, and maybe we'll have some extra things put on here and there.
But I have to tell you, Raymond, and I don't mean to do this, but I have the most wonderful family anybody could ever have. This hasn't been easy for me because I went through a lot, but I'm very happy. I think we all have a lot to thank Doug for, and I think it's just been a great experience, and I just love all of you.
Probably not.